All right. Welcome, Sondra, to Australia. I don't know if we've got anyone else outside Australia joining tonight's Zoom. But
well, there's some people from Israel, I see.
Yes, Eliezer and Pearl are from Israel. Yes. And you know some.
Judith is from Israel. She's joined.
Yes, right. Yep. So Mira, our host, you might see Mira, CFOIC there in the background. She has you all muted at the moment. And I should just mention this is going to be recorded and uploaded to YouTube and Facebook, CFOIC, Facebook. So if you don't want your photo seen, perhaps, put yourself off video, but it'll mainly be Sondra that appears on the recording, and that recording will be sent to you somewhere along the line. So, yes, and if you have questions, if you can put them in chat, I'm presuming you all know how to use chat by now. We've been Zooming for many months, haven't we? But it is a wonderful way to keep meeting, isn't it? Even though we can't meet in person, and Sondra can't get here at the moment, and we can't go to Israel, at least we're still able to see each other and communicate, and that's just wonderful. Now, for those that don't know, Sondra's CFOIC is really the only organisation where Christians have the opportunity to sow specifically into the beautiful residents of Judea, Samaria. Anybody that was on our tour last year knows how courageous and how amazing all the Israelis that are living out there are. You probably know already that it is the mountains of Israel, Judea, Samaria, of Ezekiel 36 and 37. And currently just copying Israel as a whole is copying so much flack from the other nations for daring to reclaim sovereignty. This area is rightfully Israel's from San Remo Resolution onwards in 1920, as most of you probably know. But for some reason, the world keeps chanting Israel is illegally occupying Judea, Samaria, which they would call the West Bank, of course, but not true at all. It's Judea and Samaria. That's its true name. Yes, so Sondra's been working with Christians, meeting and greeting Christians now for over 20 years. And I got involved about 10 years ago because I knew that even pro-Israel Christians didn't understand the biblical and strategic importance of this area. If residents were ever to withdraw from this area, it's suicide for Israel to do that. But they are some of the most courageous and faith-filled Israelis that you will find out there. So, Sondra, perhaps without further ado, I might hand over to you. Welcome, welcome again. Isn't it lovely to see our Sondra? Marion's waving.
Yes. Hi, Marion.
People are clapping. Yes. Thank you, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Joy, for arranging this wonderful meeting. And I know most of you are from Australia, a few of you are from other places, and it's just wonderful to be able to meet like this. I must say that Australia was the last country I visited before we all went into shutdown, no more flying the skies. Some of you I saw then. We didn't know that it would be quite some time that we'd see each other again, because I know Joy, you and Marion both were planning on being back in Israel by now. So yes. This is what it is, and we're separated. But this is wonderful. Isn't technology absolutely amazing? So anyway, here we are. And one thing I'd just like to just to remind you, we will be taking question and answers at the end. So if you have questions, just put them into the chat box. And I would like to just encourage you to join our YouTube, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and to like us on Facebook, and that helps us reach that many more people. Okay, so we're talking today about sovereignty. There's a big buzz now, especially in the last few weeks, about sovereignty, and that really takes us to the Trump plan in January, after a lot of promotion. Talk about the deal of the century. President Trump of the United States actually publicized his plan. It's not really an agreement of any kind. It is a proposal. It's called Peace to Prosperity, a vision to improve the lives of the Palestinian and Israeli people. And we will be discussing that plan specifically. But before we get to that, I want to just give a little bit of background. When people talk about sovereignty and Judea and Samaria, even if we talk about the various terms that are being used, such as applying or extending sovereignty on the one hand, or annexing the area on the other, what do these terms mean, and how various uses of these terms reflect sometimes what your focus is. But in order to understand all of this, let's first start by saying, you all know, of course, that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people, because way back when, in the beginning of the history of humankind, God set it aside for the Jewish people, and actually said this to Abraham for the first time in Genesis 12. And I know I'm speaking to an audience that knows all that, so I'm not going to spend time now going through the biblical scriptures and how we know all that. Let's just lay this as a principle that I think we all can agree on, that if we look at biblical principles, there's no question that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. And also, God made it very clear that even though there would be periods of exile, this promise that God made to Israel, that the land would be an everlasting possession, that indeed was an eternal promise. And God reflects that in many things, both in Deuteronomy, later on through the prophets, that even after a period of exile, the people of Israel come back to the land. So if I look at, someone will say, like, well, what justification? How can you justify that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people? I would say our title deed to that land is found in the Bible. Everything else is detail. Okay. Unfortunately, though, when we're dealing with world diplomacy and politics and all kinds of other things, you also have to understand the legality behind this. And unfortunately, today, many times when people discuss the issue of, well, who does the land belong to anyway? Who are the people who should, based on justice, based on law, whatever, who are the people that this land actually belongs to? You'll hear very often the statement, well, we all know that under international law, the settlements are illegal. So I have to first say categorically, that is a false statement. Because even if you are completely and totally secular, you don't believe the Bible, you don't believe God, you don't believe anything, okay? But you believe law, you believe international law, you can go back to history, you can go back to documents. Just looking at that framework of facts, you will see that the land legally belongs to Israel. And I'd like to give a quick review of that issue first, okay? So first of all, historically, those who don't believe in the Bible, okay, so they don't believe in God's promises. But there's only one nation historically that has ever called the land of Israel home, and that is the nation of Israel. From the time of Joshua till today, that is a historical fact. And in fact, today what's so amazing is archaeologists are constantly finding material evidence through their archaeological digs that prove all these various facts and stories and stuff that we're reading in the Bible. So that so much of what we've read in the Bible has also since then been proven to be historical fact, even for people that don't believe in God and don't believe the Bible is God's word. Okay, so we know there was the David established this huge kingdom, the United Kingdom, and afterwards Solomon. Then there was a divided kingdom, and there were different, but it was all Israel. All of this was Israel. Okay, now let's jump to the 20th century, actually the 19th century, I would say. first of all, from the second exile, from the destruction of the Second Temple in the 1st century, throughout the ages, Jews always continue to look towards Israel and to believe and pray that one day God would return them to the land of Israel. So you have no other precedent on earth for a nation being exiled from its land for almost 2,000 years, continuing to consider that piece of real estate its national home. So it's not like, okay, we left. I mean, you hear Arabs say they don't believe that we're the original biblical Jewish people, but they'll say, well, the Jews, they're from Poland, they're from Germany, they're from America, wherever they're from. What does that have to do with Israel? But meanwhile, if you look at Jews throughout history, all these different places continue to pray to God, please return us to Zion. And in fact, when we prayed, we always faced towards Jerusalem, wherever we happen to be around the world. So that is fact, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, on that factual foundation, we know that in the 19th century began a number of different movements that later coalesced into what became known as the Zionist movement, where Jews began to think practically about a return to the land in their day. Different groups of people actually started to come to Israel, and of course Herzl created this modern political Zionist movement, which fed on this desire of the nation to go back to the land, but turned it into a political movement. He was actually approaching the various rulers, kings, queens, and prime ministers of Europe, looking for, and the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, looking for ways to legally enable the Jews to come back into the land in a practical and legal way. All this came to a head in 1917, when in the middle of World War I, when the British were, for a number of various reasons, and one of them is, if you look at Lord Balfour and Lloyd George, who was the prime minister, both of these people, by the way, were coming from what we today call Christian Zionist backgrounds. So they were coming with this belief that the land of Israel does belong to the Jewish people, but they also had national interests at stake, because it was their interest to defeat the Ottoman Empire, and it was their interest to rally the Jews who lived in Israel at the time to their cause. And therefore they put out this declaration called the Balfour Declaration, which basically recognized or basically expressed the British government's recognition of the right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, and expressly talked about establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Palestine in those years referred to all of Israel as we know it today, including Judea and Samaria, plus all of Jordan as we know it today. After World War I, the British and the Allies succeeded in defeating the Ottoman Empire, and the British were given a mandate for Palestine. And in this mandate, which initially was mentioned in the San Remo Treaty, this treaty that was one of the treaties that concluded World War I, the San Remo Treaty specifically laid out the boundaries of this mandate for Palestine, and called for not only that the British were being given the mandate in order to help the Jews establish a homeland, clearly a state, but also specifically said that the Jews would have right to close settlement throughout the area, okay? Very short time after that treaty was signed, Britain already breached the mandate by taking 74% of the area and transferring it to the Arabs and establishing the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Okay, so this is the area east of the Jordan River, what was also part of biblical Israel, but as we all know, never as centrally holy and part of the land of Israel as what was west of the Jordan. Moses, as you all know, was desperate to enter the land of Israel. He was able to be east of the Jordan. He was not able to cross the Jordan and to go into Israel. So this has always been the most important part. And therefore, the Jewish community did not get overly excited by the fact that that aspect was already given to the Arabs. On the contrary, there was a sense of relief. Okay, we've solved the Arab problem. They get Jordan, we get the rest. Unfortunately, the British continued to renege on their promise. And that brings us to 1947, where the issue was placed before the United Nations. And the United Nations voted to partition the land into two states, an Arab state and a Jewish state. But fortunately or unfortunately, as the case may be, the Arabs were united in rejecting that proposal. Okay? At which point, 1948, May 15th, the British left, and the Jews announced the establishment of a state of Israel. Now, on purpose, no borders were announced because there were no borders. Nobody knew what was going to happen next. The leadership here in Israel realized that Israel was going to be easily attacked on all sides, which it was immediately. And essentially what happened is in 1949, that war somewhat came to an end, not with any peace treaties, not with a formal ending of the state of war. Israel remained in a state of war with all the surrounding Arab nations, but a treaty was signed, an armistice agreement. The armistice agreement set the lines in Israel between Israel and its neighbors based on where the armies actually were. Now, the area that we're talking about now, Judea and Samaria, that was an area that is also referred to as the West Bank. That is an area that was annexed by Jordan. They called it the West Bank. Okay, and that's why the West Bank is really an inappropriate word to use because it recognizes Jordan's claim to the area, something that Jordan itself is already no longer is interested in. In 1988, Jordan formally relinquished all claim to Judea and Samaria, and that was ensconced in a treaty between Jordan and Israel in 1994. So that's finished. Okay, but in fact, Israel, excuse me, Israel did not have any presence in Judea and Samaria. It was occupied by Jordan, but legally, and this is very important, legally, Jordan was an illegal occupier of Judea and Samaria. Their annexation of the area was never recognized, with the exception of Great Britain and Pakistan. Okay, 1967, Jordan attacks Israel from this same area, and we respond and liberate the whole area. So now the question is, who does the area really belong to? And there are two very fundamental facts here that support Israel's superior claim. The first is, if we go back to the original San Remo Treaty, which is based on the Balfour Declaration, the area of Judea and Samaria excuse me, is included in the area that was set aside for the establishment of a Jewish homeland and was set aside for close Jewish settlement throughout the area. Because the Arabs never accepted the partition plan in 1947 and never entered into any kind of treaty with Israel that recognized something about Judea and Samaria, that original classification of the area under the San Remo Treaty as belonging or setting aside for a Jewish homeland and for settlement has never been changed. So if you look at international law on this issue, this area always was set aside for Israel. No other country had a claim to that area. The second issue is, I think, not quite as strong an issue, but also significant, is that in 1967, Jordan initiated and attacked Israel from Judea and Samaria. When you start a war and attack another country from area that you control, that other country is perfectly legitimate for that other country to then take over the area from which it was attacked, okay? So our presence in Judea and Samaria is 100% legitimate under international law because we were attacked from that area. But our, shall we say, our legal right to the land itself, the fundamental right, is deriving from the San Remo Treaty. And that has never been changed. Okay. No. What happened? In 1967, Israel came into the area. At that point in time, it could have already extended its sovereignty to over all the areas that it had captured, which at that time included the Gaza Strip, all of Judea and Samaria, and the Golan Heights. Unfortunately, the only thing it did at that point was to extend its sovereignty to Jerusalem. And there's no, of course, there was no debate about Jerusalem at that time, although of course the Arabs debated it, but within the Jewish world, there was absolutely no debate. There's no question. Jerusalem is only the capital of Israel. It's never been the capital of anyone else. It has never been a city belonging to any other people. Jerusalem is a Jewish city. It is Zion, and it belongs as the capital of Israel. A few years later, Israel also extended its sovereignty over the Golan Heights. In both of these cases, both the Golan Heights and Judea and Jerusalem, our sovereignty there was not recognized by other countries. And in fact, embassies remained in Tel Aviv, okay? Because all these countries around the world never recognized that Jerusalem was the capital. Of course, this created a ridiculous situation because, where is the seat of government in Israel? In Jerusalem. Where is the prime minister? In Jerusalem. So you have these diplomats that would come into Israel, being handled by their embassy in Tel Aviv, but if they wanted to meet the prime minister or the foreign minister, they had to travel to Jerusalem. So there was a de facto recognition that Israel is the seat of government, but they refused to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital. Okay? And that brings us really to today. Since 1967 until today, of course, we have lost no time, and against unbelievable odds, the settlement movement began to settle initially as a grassroots movement, afterwards with government support and approval. And today we've reached the situation that we have close to 500,000 Jews living in Judea and Samaria, living in a situation where Israeli law doesn't really apply to us in the normal sense. As Israeli citizens, we are responsible to obey all the laws of the state. We pay all the same income tax as everybody else does. And, just about everything that refers to an individual citizen applies to us because we're Israeli citizens. But so many things having to do with developing the area, building the communities, simple decisions. For example, we have a community with a certain land reserve, and we want to extend the community, build another few streets, another few houses. Any other place in the world, the municipality would have the complete control over that decision. And they would, of course, be taking into account, employment, roads, sewage, zoning issues, and would then decide to build whatever they wanted to build. In this case, in Israel, when you need to build something in Tel Aviv or in Haifa, that's exactly how it works. It's up to the city. In Judea and Samaria, the prime minister has to sign off on this. It all becomes a political decision. And that political decision is supported by the very difficult legal situation we find ourselves in. That this area in Judea and Samaria has never been made part of Israel legally. Our sovereignty has never been extended there. Israel is considered an administrator of the area, but not sovereign in the area. And that has created all these difficulties. Now, for a very long time, I believe, and most people, I think, who live here in Judea and Samaria will agree to this, that the very fact of our somewhat tenuous situation legally has created opportunities for our enemies to assume that our presence here is temporary. And because no one has ever been able to say we are part of sovereign Israel, that already opens up the possibility that Israel will one day surrender its hold on some of these areas. And this has also created issues in Israel, where there are many people who, less today perhaps than in earlier years. I remember when I signed a contract to build my house here in Samaria, in Karnei Shomron. At the time, that was a very small community, just starting out. Karnei Shomron itself had been around for a few years, but small. And the neighborhood that I was moving to was just getting started. We went out, when we came out for the first time to visit, there was just bulldozers and the beginnings of houses. Nobody lived there yet. This is back in early '85. So, I remember then telling my parents we had just signed a contract, which would effectively mean taking all of our life savings and mortgaging ourselves to the hilt for many, many years, 25 years, and all this in a place that at any time, Israel could say, all right, we're giving it to the Arabs, you got to get out of there. And that was actually in our contract. The contract that we signed with the government for the use of the land said, but if at any point the state of Israel decides to, hand this over to somebody else, you got to get out and we will pay you some kind of fair compensation. So my parents came to me and they said, you're crazy? You're not millionaires. You dump all your money in this. What's going to happen if they give it away? And this was, something, of course, that even good Jews who believed strongly that this was our land would make them hesitate to put all their life savings in something that could get, given away. And of course, in 2005, when the government of Israel actually forcibly evacuated all the Jews from the Gaza Strip, that was exactly what happened. These people who had put their life savings and their life's work into homes and farms in the Gaza Strip in Gush Katif were suddenly homeless. Their homes were destroyed, and the battle for compensation was a very steep one, and we all know that was a very terrible, terrible time. So these things are all part of this lack of sovereignty. Because once Israel is sovereign, it can't just give away part of its sovereign territory, certainly without having a very difficult process internally, legally, okay? But it also sends a very powerful message to our neighbors and enemies. This is ours, and we have no intention of ever giving it away to anybody else. And that brings us to what's happening today, okay? Finally, and we have to credit many people, writers and thinkers in Israel who pushed this agenda along for quite some time. But at some time a few years ago, Benjamin Netanyahu, our prime minister for many years already, adopted this agenda. And he, with President Trump, who is probably the most favorable president to Israel that we've ever seen in the United States, went along with it. And they came out with a plan that basically sets the stage for sovereignty. Plan says that the United States will recognize Israel's applying sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. Now, previous to this actual plan, there were a number of statements that were put out by Trump and many of his advisors. There were also some very significant actions. For example, the United States moved its embassy to Jerusalem and recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Totally new kind of development. The United States also recognized Israel's sovereignty in the Golan Heights. So we have here precedent where the United States already recognized sovereignty that Israel had already extended many years ago, but now it was officially recognized by the United States. And then we had the plan itself, plus statements from the Secretary of State, Pompeo, and others on behalf of the American administration, stating that Israel had the right to live in Judea and Samaria, recognize its historical and biblical right, and saying very clearly that Israel will recognize the extension of sovereignty. Now, if you go into the plan itself, and I actually have a printout of this plan here, I recommend it for those of you who want to read something very technical and legal, but it's important to read if you have the patience for it, but I'm going to summarize it for you, okay? So what the plan says is that Israel, there will be a part of Judea and Samaria that Israel can assume will be theirs forever. There will be a part of Judea and Samaria that is reserved for a Palestinian state, should the Palestinians decide to get their act together and create a Palestinian state, but the definition of Palestinian state and the criteria that they must pass or they must fulfill in order to get that Palestinian state are very strict and actually very welcome to Israel. One of the things that is most significant about this plan is that for the first time, the plan gives recognition to Israeli actions without requiring any sort of concession in return. In other words, the plan makes very clear that Israel can extend its sovereignty to up to 30% of the area in Judea and Samaria without giving anything in return. The next stage is that the Palestinians are invited to come to the table, and they are given 4 years to come to the table, during which time this other 70% of the land has been set aside for them to establish a Palestinian state. Nothing says that they will get the 70%. Nothing in the plan says that Israel will ultimately only have 30%. What it's basically said is we can recognize Israel's extending sovereignty right away to this 30%. And the rest depends on the Palestinians. The implication, though, is if the Palestinians do not come to the table in 4 years or don't fulfill these requirements in 4 years, then all bets are off. And basically leaves open the ability for Israel at that point to do whatever it wants. Annex more, change the situation, whatever. Now, the Palestinians' response to this from the beginning was, rejection, refusal to even carry on discussions with either Israel or the United States. When this plan was announced in January, Netanyahu right then said, great, I'm going back to Israel, and within 5 days, we're extending sovereignty, okay? We are now in July, that was in January, 6 months have passed, nothing has happened. Initially, it was great concern, and what we understood at that point was, unfortunately, and I blame the Israeli government for this, unfortunately, Israel itself, now Bibi knew about this plan because he was involved in whispering in Trump's ear all the time about different ways of engineering this. He had been for a couple of years already in touch with Jared Kushner, with Pompeo, with Trump himself. So he was very much involved in understanding at least the basic outlines of the plan. And yet, for some reason, no map had been created as to where we're going to, what this 30% includes. Now, the Trump plan makes it very clear that this original annexation will encompass, or can encompass, every single Jewish community in Judea and Samaria. So that in and of itself is wonderful. The plan also makes it very clear that it envisions no one having to leave their homes. Okay, now, the conceptual map that went along with this plan was indeed problematic, because what it does show is about 15, well, actually the map, yes, 15 communities that are actually named that are enclaves, isolated enclaves, which means the community itself will be part of Israel, but the roads leading to and from community go through Palestinian area, okay? So this, of course, was a major question on this area. But what I want to make very, very clear is that the situation with regard to the area Israel was planning to annex will change, the legal situation. The situation with respect to the other 70% is no different than it is today, which means just because we've annexed 30% does not mean we've given up the other 70%. It means that the Israeli government and the Israeli army remains in full control of all the roads leading to all the communities, including the most isolated ones, okay? The other thing that's very important to remember is when I mentioned earlier the criteria for the establishment of a Palestinian state and the definition of a Palestinian state. So first of all, the definition of the Palestinian state under this plan includes the fact that the Palestinians will have no security control of the area. Security and control of the entire area west of the Jordan River remains in Israel's hands, which means even if they have a so-called Palestinian state, they have no right to be armed in any way. They have to completely demilitarize and remove all arms from every individual terrorist group, etc., within their area. They have no right to an army. They have no control of their airspace. They have no control of their borders, because Israel retains ultimate security control over everything. So if you ask me, is this Palestinian state really a state? I say no, because it is fundamental to any real state that they have control over their airspace, the right to bear arms, and control over their borders. So if you look at it carefully, what they're calling a state is probably more accurately referred to or known as an autonomy. And what we have to recognize today is, since the Oslo Accords, the process that began in 1993, to our great distress, this already created an autonomy. The Palestinian Authority is an effective autonomy where it has complete control in Area A, shared control with Israel in Area B. Area C remains totally in control of Israel. Now, after a number of years of terrorism and whatever, beginning in 2002, Israel went into Area A as well. So today, even in Area A, the Israeli army exercises some level of security control in these areas. So what we have today on the ground is a Palestinian autonomy. That is not being changed or limited in any way by this, but it's also not being extended, at least at this point. Now, let me just read for you one sentence. These are a number of criteria that have been set forth. Not only we've now redefined the state, but now, first of all, both Israel and the United States have to jointly agree in good faith that this state will be recognized. And it's set forth here the criteria for recognizing that state. So just let this one, I'll just read one of them. The Palestinians shall have implemented a governing system with a constitution or another system for establishing the rule of law that provides for freedom of press, free and fair elections, respect for human rights for its citizens, protections for religious freedom and for religious minorities to observe their faith, uniform and fair enforcement of law and contractual rights, due process under law, an independent judiciary, and it continues on. And then it says one more thing. The Palestinians shall have ended all programs, including school curricula and textbooks, that serve to incite or promote hatred or antagonism towards its neighbors, or which compensate or incentivize criminal or violent activity. Now, anybody who is aware of what's going on today in the Middle East will understand there's no way in the world that the Palestinians will ever meet these criteria unless they go through a total change of personality and they are different than who they are today. Of course, if they're different than who they are today, there's certainly, in my opinion, something to talk about a nice little autonomy for the Palestinians. Let them run their own systems, their own education, let them do all of that. We remain in control of the whole area. We could say, okay, this is an Arab village and that's an Arab village, and we don't want to interfere with the way you run your lives, and we don't want to, cramp your style. On the opposite, we want to work with you. We want to help you with economic opportunities, business opportunities. Why not? Okay? But what this is setting forth here, the vision that is put forth in this plan, essentially turns the Palestinians into Canada, and the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians into a U.S.-Canada type of relationship, or if you will, an Australia-New Zealand kind of a relationship, okay? Nice, friendly people, you respect each other. Can any of you envision this really happening in our lifetime with the Palestinians as we know that society? I don't think so, okay? There's been a raging debate going on in Israel, of course, in recent weeks, on this issue of sovereignty. There is absolute consensus in Judea and Samaria and among many, many people throughout Israel that sovereignty is a wonderful thing. The question that has arisen is, does applying sovereignty within the context of a Trump plan mean that by definition you are recognizing a Palestinian state? Now, in my opinion, no, because even the way the Palestinian state is defined under the Trump plan, it's not really a state. It's an autonomy. But also, if you read the Trump plan, applying sovereignty and American recognition of that sovereignty has never been conditional on how we see the Palestinians. That's left for this 4-year negotiation process, which we haven't even begun. And in fact, throughout these past few months, Bibi promised, and in fact, it was part of the negotiation process and the coalition agreements that he entered into with Benny Gantz, who is now his coalition partner, a very uneasy coalition relationship, I must admit. But he extracted from Gantz a promise that Gantz would not stand in the way of extending sovereignty as of July 1st. All of us were looking to July 1st. Let's see what's happening. Let's see what Netanyahu is going to do. Unfortunately, today we are July 8th, a week after July 1st, and nothing has happened. Netanyahu has not even made a statement saying, I'm still looking at doing this, but, some things have come up. Also, we've had no official statements coming out of anywhere. The leadership of Judea and Samaria has not been involved in the discussions with the Americans, discussions on the maps. They don't know what's happening either. The Americans, we get conflicting statements. Pompeo will say one thing. Kushner will say something else. Trump is saying very little at all. Nobody knows what's happening. Rumors are that the Americans, in contradiction to the way this plan was presented initially, both in the original announcement at that press conference and in the plan itself, that the Americans today are actually demanding a quid pro quo from Israel for them to recognize sovereignty. Now, I have no way of knowing if that's true. That is what some newspaper articles are saying. But nobody is able to back that up with a particular statement that is, with identification of who said it. So where we are today is extremely mystified, okay? Now, there's a lot that we're mystified about these days. Corona is leaving us mystified too. There's so many things that nobody knows what's going on. For me, I find it extremely disturbing that Netanyahu did not move forward on July 1st and just annexed it. I don't understand what is the delay. I don't believe that the Israeli government should be waiting for American approval. I believe that we should be annexing and expecting American recognition in line with the promises that were made, clearly and in front of international cameras by American representatives. The Secretary of State said this very clearly, as did President Trump. So I am disappointed that Netanyahu did not take that opportunity to do this. But this is where we are today. What I can tell you, our situation on the ground today, on the one hand, there's great disappointment about sovereignty, but at the other hand, still optimism, because the story is not over. Our concern is that whatever is done needs to be done before the elections in the United States in November. Because today, especially today, surveys are showing that Trump has an uphill climb, and it's not at all sure that he will win re-election. We know for a fact that if Biden becomes the next president of the United States, he will not see himself obligated to this plan in any way. Because as I said initially, it is a vision. It is not an agreement. However, should America recognize sovereignty, that is something that no president that comes afterwards can change, okay? Because something like that is an act of state. If a president recognizes the sovereignty of a particular country, or the capital of Jerusalem, a president that follows really cannot change that. So this is really where our race is right now. On the other hand, here on the ground, the discussion of sovereignty has already created many challenges for us, okay? Because the Arabs are very excited about this whole thing. Frankly, I think that the response that we can expect from the Arabs if we do extend sovereignty is not something that I'm particularly concerned with on an overall basis. I don't think anything is going to happen that is going to threaten the survival of Israel or force us to feel that we made a huge mistake, because I think the benefits will far outweigh the problems. However, we cannot ignore the fact that already today there is an upsurge in Arab terrorism here in Judea and Samaria, that especially some of our most vulnerable communities are today more at risk than they were before. So one of the things that we're particularly involved with here in Israel, and particularly within CFOIC, is to do whatever we can to ensure that these communities are ready for whatever comes. We have had a deluge of requests recently for surveillance cameras from all kinds of communities. Surveillance cameras are now seen as one of the most effective ways of ensuring that a terrorist attack doesn't happen, because you can see the terrorist attack before it starts. While the Arabs are gathering on the outskirts of the community, the cameras pick them up, especially those with sophisticated night vision capabilities or heat-seeking capabilities, and then they're able to send the army to them and catch them before it happens. And we actually have real-time footage that shows how this actually, camera, for example, that we provided for a community about a year ago in Rechelim, actually did stop an attack before it could happen. So this is what we're doing. We're looking to the future. We're hoping sovereignty will happen, but we need, first of all, every one of you to get involved petition your government leaders to support Israel in this move rather than oppose Israel in this move. And we need each and every one of you to do whatever you can to support us and help us move forward so that we're ready for this move. I would like now to show you a film that we recently produced. As you can see, it's a film that is takes into account the fact that because of Corona, we're not seeing people in person for quite some time now, unfortunately. So I'd like to show you this film because this will also give you a better idea of what CFOIC is involved with and how people like yourselves are making such a huge difference here in Judea and Samaria.
We are experiencing a crisis of untold proportions. A simple virus has closed businesses and schools, churches and synagogues. Borders are closed and social distancing is the norm. But are we really distant? For more than 2 decades, CFOIC Heartland has been connecting Christians from all over the world with the land of Israel. We have bridged distances and created relationships that span cultures, countries, and faiths. You and I, Christian and Jew, have partnered together based on a common faith in the truth of God's Word, to the biblical forefathers and prophets, the promise of the land of Israel as an eternal possession of the Jewish people. Today, we can no longer visit with one another. The planes that once connected us have been grounded, but our relationship will withstand that. You have loved and supported us. You have declared our right to this land before the world, and this is the land that you have helped to preserve and restore. These are the people that you have assisted and protected. This is the land that has connected us to one another.
After centuries of exile and dispersion, the people of Israel have returned to the biblical heartland, our ancestral homeland, just as God promised.
Even if your outcasts are at the ends of the world, from there the Lord your God will gather you. He will bring you to the land that your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it.
We have settled this land in fulfillment of prophecy, but we are also building a good and kind society where we reach out to our neighbors, care for them, and comfort them.
My wife and I were both Holocaust survivors, and we were married for 69 years. She passed away 3 years ago. I live alone.
Losing a spouse is an earth-shattering experience for our seniors. Loneliness, depression, this is where we must step in. At the Seniors Club, they connect to people, they smile, they laugh, they come alive.
A family in financial crisis is a family that cannot function. We help them find jobs and work with them to become better parents. But first, we have to make sure they have food.
Okay guys, we have to pack 600 food packages for tonight, so the family will have food for the holidays.
And that's where CFOIC Heartland has made all the difference.
We face so many levels of need. Teenagers at risk, children growing up in dysfunctional families, children with learning disabilities and ADD, and handicapped children. Early intervention is critical, but we're far from the urban centers where resources are plentiful. In Judea and Samaria, the community and the professionals work together, providing children with the care and the love they need. We enable these youngsters to become productive adults, contributing to Israel.
I love it here.
CFOIC has played a vital role in turning a dream of redemption into a reality.
We are surrounded by hostile Arabs who attack us at every opportunity. The Israeli army has our backs, but they can't be everywhere at once. Volunteer rapid responders are filling in the gap, protecting the people of Judea and Samaria.
What we need is cameras, drones, and communication devices.
I have been attacked by terrorists. I've lost friends. Terrorists murdered 2 boys who were hiking in the valley below. But thanks to surveillance cameras donated by CFOIC, we will be able to stop the terror before it attacks us. Our Christian friends are literally saving lives.
The restoration of our people and our land has brought ongoing challenges and risks. God has blessed our efforts, and so have you, our Christian friends. We are struggling to settle biblical Israel, to put down roots in our ancestral homeland. But you can partner with us as we nurture our children, embrace our elderly, and protect our families. Join us today and experience the fulfillment of prophecy. Together, we can weather any crisis and move forward towards restoration.
I hope you enjoyed that film. I want to actually turn over now the rest of, we have a few minutes left, and I'd like to really, give everyone the opportunity to ask questions. I hope you've written some of your questions in the chat, but I know that you, Joy, had a question that you wanted to ask. So why don't we open with that?
Okay, I'm on, aren't I? Well, I'm almost in tears here, Sondra. You've made me so homesick. And I think many others that know you and have visited the residents out there in Judea, Samaria. But yes, one thing that's particularly just devastated a lot of us in Australia here in the last week, and maybe many don't know about it, but our Foreign Minister, Senator Maurice Payne, for some reason felt Australia needed to caution Israel about reclaiming sovereignty, and this on top of our Prime Minister at a San Remo commemoration. Cynthia will remember this. He congratulated Israel on San Remo because it was the 100th anniversary, of course, April 25th. But not only our foreign minister, tried to say don't do anything, but the shadow foreign minister, Senator Penny Wong, actually made a very damning statement. But I'm just astonished. Why do nations feel they need to tell Israel, a sovereign nation, what to do? It's crazy.
I agree 100%. And it's so many people who stand with Israel have already taken it for granted that we're going to be constantly showered with international condemnation. And that is actually how people in Israel feel. It's like, and the fact that you asked this question is a fresh view, because it's something we should all be asking ourselves. How is it that everybody all over the world feels that they have the right to tell Israel what to do, and they have the right to not just influence or express their opinions, but really force? And they talk about sanctions if we don't do what they want. And I think a lot of this really goes back to back in the 70s. Well, first of all, a lot of people can trace this to anti-Semitism. There's certainly voices all over the world that are rooted in classic anti-Semitism, and they have now transformed their rhetoric to anti-Israel as opposed to anti-Semitism, and that's certainly playing a role in their influence in their own governments. But if we go back to when things really, really, I think, became significant, where everything changed on this issue, was going back into the 70s. And then, for the first time, we saw the Arab world imposing an oil boycott or an oil shortage on the rest of the world. And in those years, Saudi Arabia really produced most of the world's oil, and most Western countries were very dependent on oil. And I personally remember just after the Yom Kippur War, a war when Israel was attacked totally unprovoked by Egypt and Syria, and then to add, injury to all of that, Saudi Arabia puts an oil embargo against all of Western nations for the sin of supporting, even at some level, supporting Israel. And again, this happens in 1979. And I remember, as a teenager and then as a young woman in the States at that time, people lining up at 4 a.m. At the gas pumps in order to fill their cars, not knowing if they will have enough petrol for the day. And this was a very frightening time. And of course, that really brought America to its knees. And that, not just America, but many other countries as well. And I think at that point, we see it today, for example, the countries that continue to trade with Iran. Germany continued to trade with Iran. And these are, what happened is you have these certain countries that have oil or have other things that were able to hold these countries hostage. And so even though some of these countries would say, well, we really care about the Palestinians, poor things, their rights are being, infringed upon, but it was really it was rhetoric. It didn't mean anything because anybody can say anything, and these countries knew as well as we know that the Palestinians, if there was any infringements of their rights, is because we're looking for terrorists. We're not looking to persecute people just because they happen to be Palestinians. It's all about trying to prevent terrorism. But these interests played into it. And it became almost automatic. So that today, and I think this is part of where Trump is coming from. The United States, for example, today is practically independent of any Middle Eastern oil. And so it was Trump, though, that's the first president to say, hey, wait, if that's the situation, we can reevaluate our relationship. And also the situation today is Saudi Arabia is more interested in Israeli support than in the Palestinians, because they understand that by working with Israel, they can hope to defeat Iran and save themselves from the various plans Iran has against Saudi Arabia, even as they have plans against America and Israel. So I think this is where it's coming from. It came from the Arab world really manipulating the international scene, but today it's just become a question of anti-Semitism, of many Muslim populations, for example, in Europe, that are influencing diplomacy, and good old-fashioned anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Sondra. I'd like to present you now with some questions that were submitted by viewers. This is a question that was submitted by Liz Hardy. What do you make of a number of Arabs speaking about wanting Israeli sovereignty because of PA corruption?
I think it's absolutely true. I personally met with a Palestinian businessman who seems to have a great deal of influence in the Hebron area, who told me he is absolutely convinced that the vast majority of Palestinians want Israeli sovereignty over them as well. There was the initial plan would extend sovereignty only to areas where Jews are living and not where Arabs are living. But this guy was hoping and praying that Netanyahu would extend sovereignty over him. He says, because the Palestinians, no Arab country, looked at me and he said, look at Israel, look at what you are. In 70 years, you have so much economic success, but more important than anything else, you are a democracy. We Arabs have more rights and more abilities here for growth and for success in Israel than we would have in any other country in the Middle East. And of course, they don't have much confidence in the Palestinian Authority either. So I think this is a good thing, and we just have to applaud those people that have the guts to say it, because it's not easy for them.
Absolutely. Here's another viewer submitted question. This one's from John Chapman. Do you think sovereignty over Judea and Samaria will be carried out or not?
I hope. I'm not a prophet. I have no way of saying. I do believe that Netanyahu will have a hard time justifying not applying at least some level of sovereignty. And I hope and pray he doesn't go the easy way and apply sovereignty to Ma'ale Adumim and maybe Gush Etzion and leave out the rest of us. I think it is vital, as I said, that he do apply sovereignty, but whether that happens, a lot depends on all of us. We need to be pressuring Israel and you pressuring your governments and supporting the communities in Judea and Samaria, because that in and of itself sends a very important message to the world and to our government in Israel.
Okay, we have another question here from Helen Nixon. If under international law, Israel has a right to its land, why does it only go for 30% and not 100%?
Well, the issue here was just a tactical issue. The issue is at this point in time, because America wanted to leave the way open for some level of Palestinian state, then it said it would recognize a limited kind of sovereignty right now. And that's really why we're talking at 30%. I do not personally think it's wise or practical to extend sovereignty beyond the 30%, because if we can achieve American recognition of that sovereignty, that already is an enormous coup. And it's something that will change the whole balance of power. Today, you know, the boycott movement, BDS, is just growing. And to have America recognize every single Jewish community in Judea and Samaria as a sovereign part of Israel, that already is an amazing development. What we're going to do with the rest, I don't know. Don't forget, we have, you know, at least 2 million Arabs living there, and none of us want them to become Israeli citizens overnight. So there's a lot of discussion as to what to do with the rest. But even if we don't extend sovereignty immediately over the rest, that doesn't mean we don't believe that we need to be in control of the rest, which, as I said, we still are, at least security-wise. We have to also be mindful of what has already happened. Oslo happened. We didn't like it. It was a bad idea. But meanwhile, we can't undo 25 years or almost 30 years of what has happened. We have to move in a certain measured, careful, wise way.
And this was another question that was submitted ahead of time. Sondra, can you clarify how much land in Judea and Samaria Israelis reside upon, and how much land are the Arabs encroaching on in Area C, which they shouldn't be entering at all?
Okay, I am not at all good at percentages, so I don't know that. I can't tell you that, but I can tell you that Area C, the problem in Area C, as I see it, is a problem of the Israeli government and the Israeli army, because we should be enforcing those restrictions. When Arabs start to build, we should at that point prevent them from building. Of course, unless it's on their land. If it's on land that's proved to be their ownership and they want to build a house, you know, they have a right to do that, and I would be in favor of giving them a building permit for something like that, or if they want to have a farm or whatever. But that's not what's happening. We have people encroaching on public land that's in Area C and just taking it, building, planting, whatever. And unfortunately, Israel has not been as vigilant as it should have been in preventing this. And this is, of course, a grave concern to us. But that's an internal issue. I mean, it's something that we as Israelis need to be pressuring our government about. There have been many articles talked about this. There is a lot of lobbying going on about this in Knesset. And we're hoping, actually, that this extending sovereignty will just make that issue that much easier. Because one of the biggest problems is they're encroaching on land that would be within the area that we would be extending sovereignty over anyway. So that is where part of the discussion is heading. You know what, I don't want to take, I know some of you have had additional questions, but we're already, you know, moving, you know, going beyond the time that we had set for this, and I want to be mindful of your time. So I think we need to, you know, kind of close this, at least this formal part of the question answers. I know, Joy, you had a few things that you wanted to say before we finished, but after we formally close this meeting, if any of you want to continue, we're certainly happy to continue with more question and answer discussion. Joy?
I'm on, Nira? Yeah. Well, Sondra, thank you for that message, and I hope people are feeling better informed. And look, we not only love you because you're you and all the residents out there in Judea and Samaria, but as I've always said, it's exciting for us to see prophecy being fulfilled by you people. We're no longer just reading the book and, you know, seeing how it fits in with our end time theology, that we have the opportunity to be part of fulfilling prophecy as you give to the different communities. So I would encourage people to get involved, and particularly with the security needs, because it is going to become a major issue in the days to come. It always has been. That's why I admire you people so much, that you run the gauntlet of terrorism and your own left the Supreme Court, but you feel it's a calling from God, a mitzvah to be out there, and you're doing it, and we have an opportunity to partner with you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, all of you. So if there's anybody else who wanted to present any further questions, we can stay on for a bit longer. But those of you who want to move on are welcome to depart at this point. Did we have any further questions, Mayra, that we haven't answered?
Well, here's one question that's not specifically about sovereignty, but how can you speak about how COVID-19 is affecting the residents of Judea and Samaria?
Oh, well, it's affecting everybody in Israel. Many businesses had to close and could not reopen. People have lost their jobs. I just had a conversation yesterday with one of the senior social workers at the Samaria Regional Council Social Services Department, and he said that they have a lot of families that are just failing, and we are working with them. We're hoping to sponsor some of the children to the summer camps. These camps this year are being provided by the government, but each family still has to put in a certain minimal amount of money, so we're trying to help them cover that. But more importantly than that, we are about to provide significant donations for food. We gave food vouchers in late March, just after this COVID-19 began, and we're going to be doing that again. So this is where we're seeing the biggest effect, people who have lost their jobs. Unfortunately, after the economy opened up again, now we're in a process of closing down again because our numbers are way up, and this is, of course, a great concern. And we at CFOIC are trying to constantly remain with our fingers on the pulse, and as we see additional needs, we will be putting them out to you, and of course we would be grateful if you could help support these needs and enable us to help these families that will need our help. This was great. Thank you all so much. Wonderful to see you all, and I hope we will be able to meet in person sometime soon, either here in Israel or I come out to you in Australia. Oh, I see Joe Chin was on from Taiwan. I hope I was supposed to schedule to go to Taiwan twice in this past 6 months, and each visit had to be canceled. So I hope that I will be able to see you all. It's wonderful seeing you. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, as the case may be.